Ordinary life felt like a well-folded map I could navigate without looking. My wife and I traded grocery runs and calendar invites, our son's soccer cleats drying by the vent while coffee burbled at 6 sharp. She ran a small photography studio, and I handled logistics for a supply company, 2 lanes that rarely crossed except at dinner. Sundays belonged to hardware store errands and a loop around the lake that reset the week. We managed the practical parts of love with professional care, oil changes before the warning light, lunches labeled for early mornings, reminders timed to avoid forgetting. Even our arguments were scheduled into tidy slots that ended with streaming and a blanket folded at the couch's arm. The house hummed with reliable noises, thermostat whispers, dryer clicks, the old hinges complaint, and I read those sounds as proof that nothing dramatic could surprise us. Constancy felt like safety. I mistook quiet for certainty. Small disturbances arrived wearing nostalgia's cologne. A college acquaintance liked her posts in sudden batches, and she smiled at the screen the way people do when memory knocks. A playlist shifted toward bands we loved in our early 20s, and she asked whether I remembered a coffee shop that closed before our son was born. She started carrying a paper planner again, pressed with dried leaves, even though she lived inside digital calendars. Phone notifications moved to silent, face down beside a new leather case she said a client recommended. Gym nights stretched into blue hour, and she returned with a scent our detergent did not make. She mentioned an art walk 2 towns over as if reciting a weather report that did not require follow-up. None of it warranted alarm, it simply thinned the air, like windows cracked on a cold day. I told myself long marriages absorb phases the way old floors absorb footsteps. First suspicions grew in the places routine used to anchor. She mixed up a cousin's newborn name with a classmate's baby from a decade ago, then laughed too brightly at the correction. Her camera bag acquired a second strap monogrammed with initials I didn't recognize. A ticket stub from a museum 2 towns over hid in a jacket pocket with a timestamp that overlapped a supposed client shoot nearby. Mileage on the car told stories the shared calendar would not, small weeknight leaps that did not land near our grocery or the studio. The dog waited by the door at hours no one used to arrive and then abandoned the post, choosing the hallway like a neutral country. She practiced a new hairstyle from photos I had never seen, the kind perfected in windows of places we no longer visit. I began writing dates in a pocket notebook labeled Now, a quiet ledger that steadied my hands. Tangible clues assembled themselves with bureaucratic patience. The bank app recorded modest charges at a riverside cafe we had visited only twice, always timed with evenings that left no leftovers in the fridge. A rideshare receipt landed in our shared email with pickup from a side street by a park and drop at a boutique hotel that disguised itself behind a parent company's name. The cloud autosaved a blurred photo of a mural we once posed beneath in graduate school, now framed by unfamiliar shoulders. Her calendar filled with gray blocks titled Planning, an unhelpful word multiplying like rabbits. A florist receipt folded into the studio ledger listed peonies out of season, addressed to initials that matched the strap. Individually, each line could shrug. Together they sketched a corridor memory would gladly travel. I printed what I could, slid it into a folder, and admitted that truth needed a place to live outside my head. Verification required daylight and public places. I postponed a site visit and drove to the Riverside Cafe with a paperback I did not read. The windows mirrored the water, and inside, late afternoon light turned cups into small lanterns. At 3:19 she arrived in a coat I knew by the sleeve and sat facing the door, a habit from our city days. Moments later he slipped into the seat opposite, older, hair grayer, posture familiar in a way that outlasted time. Their conversation moved like a song they hadn't forgotten, the rests as fluent as the notes. Her hand floated toward her necklace and stayed there, the old tell I had adored when we were new. They left a tip that suggested comfort, not ceremony, and walked toward the park with practiced spacing that closed and opened without thought. I did not take pictures. I memorized the light, the cup, the way the door sighed. Confirmation arrived from the only witness that never sleeps. A friend tagged a neighborhood fundraiser, and the photo carousel paused on a frame where my wife stood laughing too close to a man I recognized from an old album, shoulder angles recalling a language older than our mortgage. The algorithm proposed names with the indifference of machines that do not care about discretion. A comment thread mentioned an afterparty at the small bar near the hotel that kept appearing in receipts, and another tagged the mural's block like a casual footnote. I saved the post, not for spectacle but for sequence, and mapped it against the notebook's columns. The pattern drew itself without asking permission. I felt the room widen and then narrow to a path measured in verbs instead of feelings. The next day would need a plan that could hold weight without breaking. Immediate fallout sounded like careful sentences and verbs that obeyed gravity. I made pasta for our son, checked his homework, and laid out cleats for practice, protecting the perimeter of normal. After bedtime, I placed the printouts, screenshots, and a short plan on the table. The plan contained actions rather than speeches, separate rooms, communication limited to parenting and bills, counseling scheduled, and a consultation with an attorney to understand options rather than ignite war. When she came in from the studio, I used dates and addresses like coordinates, then stepped back from explanations that would only multiply. The dog slept at my doorway like a sentry who chooses the person with the steadier breath. I turned my phone to allow only family through the night and wrote the next morning's tasks on an index card. Shock did not howl. It organized itself into lines I could follow. Cutting ties with the past she had resurrected required tools that looked ordinary. I changed the front door code and rotated passwords into a vault with keys only I held. I archived our couple albums instead of deleting them, giving memory a calendar I controlled. I blocked him after preserving what counsel might need, not as punishment but as a firewall. 2 friends received assignments, one to redirect family curiosity, one to coordinate rides when schedules collided, so our son would not become a courier of adult weight. I took the social apps off my home screen and silenced threads that recruit pity. A box marked later collected sentimental items that did not belong to decisions made in adrenaline. The house exhaled as if relieved to dispense with rehearsal. Boundaries did not heal anything that week. They simply stopped the injury from traveling farther, the way a tourniquet buys time while the body remembers how to clot. Legal and practical logistics turned hurt into sequence. An attorney translated chaos into drafts, temporary agreements for shared expenses, a parenting plan specifying neutral handoffs under bright lobby lights, and discovery that asked for timelines without inviting theater. HR updated beneficiaries. The bank opened a solo account. The mortgage servicer annotated the file with professional calm. I listed essential bills with due dates and confirmation numbers in a spreadsheet I could trust at 3 a.m. Passwords changed, automatic payments rerouted, and retirement statements printed into a fireproof box beside passports and the deed. Calendars split into color-coded blocks described in plain, enforceable language. Stability arrived as case numbers and logins that belonged only to me. Each document signed felt like closing a drawer that had hung open for months, dangerously loose. I scheduled therapy and added it to the same calendar that once held anniversaries. Family dynamics required honesty sized for a child. We told our son that adults sometimes keep promises badly and that 2 homes might make his week steadier. His questions were practical. Practice schedules, whose driveway for carpools, which jersey lived where, and I answered with a magnet calendar he could move himself. Coaches learned just enough to watch for drift. Teachers received a brief note that respected privacy. Grandparents wanted a saga and received logistics. At exchanges we kept tones clipped and civil so he would not learn to brace. I banned names from our living room that did not belong to the people who lived there. The dog rotated beds like a small envoy, choosing whichever doorway felt calmest. Laughter returned in cautious bursts, then larger ones, the way light finds seams when someone remembers to open the curtains. Progress measured itself in ordinary bedtimes that did not negotiate. Rebuilding arrived disguised as errands I had delayed for years. I replaced the porch light and learned the ladder's balance, then fixed the cabinet hinge that whispered complaints through 2 winters. I sold a chair shaped by absence and rearranged the room until sight lines stopped arguing with memory. At sunrise I walked the lake loop alone, not to outrun grief, but to practice finishing circuits I set for myself. A weekend finance course returned authority to numbers, and a savings account named future repairs accepted modest transfers with quiet pride. Friends who stayed brought soup instead of strategies, and I practiced asking for specific help without apology. I scheduled medical appointments, sorted the junk drawer, and discovered that competence can feel like kindness when directed inward. The folder of evidence slid into a drawer. The point had shifted from proving harm to practicing care. Identity followed behavior, quiet and durable. Reflection reframed what happened as architecture rather than spectacle. She had not stumbled into romance. She had engineered an annex to our life using reclaimed nostalgia as lumber. Trusting her was not naive. It honored the contract I believed existed. My task now is not to polish ruins but to build rooms with windows that face forward. Forgiveness, where it sprouts, will be a clearance inside me that refuses to store poison, not a shortcut back to what broke. I will be civil in emails, precise in calendars, and boring on purpose in routines that protect our son. When the house hums, thermostat whispers, dryer clicks, hinge complaints, I let the sounds be neither omen nor nostalgia, only evidence of living. Forward looks ordinary and therefore precious. Clear budgets, repaired hinges, early walks, and a door that locks because my hand knows the code.